Dr. Dolittle in space! Hello everybody and welcome to I'm just getting over a cold, you'll have to excuse me, it's also freezing cold in here because I got a cold and then the heating in my office decided to die, so that was absolutely brilliant. It is goddamn cold in here because it's the end of February. Let's crack it before we get started. The other day, I showed you all this giant pile of scripts that is the Business Blaze archive, and you guys pointed out that I missed an opportunity to do this! With that out of the way, welcome to the least professional of all of my channels, but as always, the only channel where you can be sure that I have legs. Let's get started. If you're new here, what we do is Danny writes us something, I go through it, ramble on a little bit. So let's just jump in. The most expensive mistakes that have ever been made. The biggest and most expensive mistakes in history tend to be very well documented. We've all heard of the time that Decca turned down the Beatles, and newspapers have been kind enough to reveal how a series of indiscretions from Tiger Woods didn't just result in a fall from grace and a $750 million divorce settlement. That's gonna hurt. It also cost him millions more in lost endorsements and is estimated to have cost sponsors up to $12 billion. Also, there's an interesting aside here that I don't think Danny mentions, but in the UK, there wasn't a lot of stuff about Tiger Woods and his affairs coming out because there was like injunctions placed against the UK press, so they couldn't talk about it, which is super interesting. This was actually going on around the time that I was in law school, I think, and there was this justice called Justice Edie, because it's all about this striking the balance between a right to privacy and freedom of the press, and at that time, this kind of justice was leading the way on like pushing it towards the right to privacy being more important, so he got a whole load of injunctions, so the UK press, you'd go onto like CNN and it'd be like, Tiger Woods around, and on like BBC it would be like, nothing. Anyway, in a recent Business Blaze video, we've already tackled the fallout from one of the most disastrous corporate mergers of all time between AOL and Time Warner. I'm going to link to that below, so be sure to check it out, and discussed the moment when Blockbuster were finally given the chance to buy Netflix, but instead resorted to just sniggering at the very idea. Yeah, I think the dude in the meeting, did he laugh? He laughed Netflix out of the room. God, that has got to be enormously satisfying to be whoever the dude at Netflix is. And then there are the stories that just haven't happened yet, such as the time Simon forgot to register the domain name for businessblaze.com. It's true, I haven't. And ended up paying $250 million to buy it from a man with a dodgy fake accent who went under the curious name of Danny, no, Sam. Please don't do this to me, guys. Also, I'd definitely register just businessblaze.co or .org or .co. You know the .co business, the .co domain that isn't like for company? It stands for Columbia. So there you go. It's worth bearing in mind that if this video lived up to its title and we really did cover the most expensive mistakes ever made, we'd also be covering nuclear disasters, oil spills, environmental tragedies, hundreds of innocent deaths, I don't know why I'm laughing, and Wall Street traders. Oh, there's the joke. But let's try and keep this light and stick to cold tea, very expensive coffee spillages, silly plastic toys, and Martians. Alright, yeah, I guess it would be a bit of a downer if it was like, well, the most expensive mistake ever made was Chernobyl, because we had to pay out a lot of money for people who got terrible cancers. Moving swiftly on, cold tea for hipsters. And look, everyone, I'll mention stuff about hipsters and people will be like, have you seen your beard, Simon? You hipster. And it's like, what is hipster about having a beard? Beards have been around forever. Also, I'd look like Mr. Clean if I didn't have a beard. I used to not have a beard in my videos and everyone was like, who's this guy? What an egg. And then I got a beard and people were like, never get rid of the beard. I'll be completely honest, I've never heard of Snapple. I think I've heard of Snapple because I think I know this story, but I don't, it's a drink, I think. Well, cold tea for hipsters, it's probably an iced tea. US viewers are more likely to be aware of the popular purveyors of iced tea and juice drinks, but they never really made much of a dramatic splash over here in the UK, probably because we generally prefer our tea to be served piping hot and with a side serving of biscuits for dunking, which is something we do, and it is kind of nasty because you'll be dunking your biscuit in your tea and then at the end there's this weird like biscuit paste at the bottom, which is kind of disgusting. I never really grasped the concept of drinking cold tea. It just seems as wrong as downing a boiling hot pint of beer or covering your dinner in chunks of iced gravy. That all sounds horrible. However, it's hard to believe that the combination of iced tea, juice drinks, and instant oatmeal, weird, ended up developing into a recipe for one of the biggest ever corporate disasters of all time. Not that I'm suggesting that anybody decided to lump these things together in one product. Having said that, I had to Google it first to make sure that America hasn't tried this. Although, to be fair to Americans, We also have some weird-ass food in the UK, which we've discussed at length on this channel before, especially Danny's truly bizarre eating habits. Also, like, we deep fry, or I think the Scottish or people up north, they deep fry Snickers bars or Mars bars or something, which is like, I think Americans call it a Milky Way. To be fair, Quaker had already experienced soft drink success over a decade earlier when it acquired the energy drink company Gatorade, and probably figured out it could repeat the same trick with Snapple. We do have Gatorade, and the only time I ever drink Gatorade is when I'm massively hungover, because it's actually incredible for that. I guess it probably wouldn't be legal to marketing. Wait, is it Gatorade or Powerade? One of the two, whichever the one has like tons of electrolytes in. That is incredible when you've got a raging hangover. But the first major mystery is where on earth they got that sky-high valuation of Snapple from. Only a couple of years earlier, Snapple had been acquired by Thomas H. Lee Partners for an estimated $140 million. Bloody hell. Some suggest that Quaker's new valuation of $1.7 billion, it makes iced tea for hipsters. Again, I feel like I say this on every single business blaze, but I am in the wrong business. Some suggest that Quaker's new valuation of $1.7 billion was a figure plucked from the air, and some Wall Street commenters at the time were quick to observe that this was way too high. Well over $1 billion too high. Well, good for you, whoever owns Snapple. I mean, that's some serious coin. Snapple had grown a reputation as a small, new age. That's never a good thing. Brands, it's like, oh, what... New age products, healing crystals, salt lamps, meditation beads. Are those even a real thing? I feel like when I do merch for this, it's just gonna be bullshit products. You know, like, buy my merch below. What is it? Meditation beads, salt crystals. They'd found success by selling their iced tea and juice drinks in smaller shops, independent convenience stores, and at gas stations, and promoting them with quirky and kooky advertising campaigns aimed at an alternative audience. I like how Danny's put like new age and alternative in quotes. Quaker plans to ditch all of that groundwork and get Snapple drinks into the big supermarkets, helped along by bland and generic marketing campaigns which seemed to completely strip Snapple of the eccentric character it had been quietly building up for the last couple of decades. Sales of the soft drink began to plummet drastically, what a surprise, as the original customer base became disengaged by the new brand identity and new distribution channels. Yeah, it's like the thing, like, what can you imagine in the boardroom? So guys, what do you think our customer base will like? They're a bunch of hippies. Let's make it as corporate as possible. Supermarket shoppers seemed far more interested in the new range of fruit drinks that were emerging from the likes of Coca-Cola during the 1990s. It appears as if Quaker had paid massively over the odds for a brand that it didn't quite know what to do with, then proceeded to completely destroy the identity of the brand with woeful marketing and distribution that didn't seem to fit the product. Why do you pay $1.7 billion for something and then completely change the marketing around it? It makes no sense. If you're paying $1.7 billion for it, you assume it's valuable. This seems like a really bizarre decision. Just 27 short months later, but they were all Februaries, Danny, Quaker conceded defeat and sold Snapple to Triarch, maybe, for $300 million. I mean, they did, I don't know the pronunciation of Triarch, for $300 million, resulting in a loss of $1.4 billion. And a contender for one of the worst acquisitions in history. Just to rub salt in Quaker's wounds, Snapple was again sold less than a year later to Cadbury Schweppes for just over $1 billion. You know you that, Quaker, didn't you? You took a company that was worth a load, you devalued the out of it, sold it at a low, and then the next company bought it and made it worth $1 billion again. Incidentally, Snapple is also famous for printing fantastic facts on the inside of their bottle caps, so you can actually learn something useful while drinking your cold tea. I know something about facts. The only drawback is that many of them are completely wrong, which is why you should be watching Business Blaze while you drink your Snapple, rather than reading the facts inside of the lids, because they're a lie. Oh, we have some examples. Here are the biggest bogus facts brought to you by Snapple, which we'll dissect later on in the video. I'm already excited. The average human will eat an average of 8 spiders a year while asleep. I know that's not true because I made a video about it. Dueling is legal in Paraguay as long as both parties are registered blood donors. Owls are the only birds that can see the color blue. Holland is the only country with a national dog. Okay, so none of these are true, but they're also fairly boring. I mean, if you're just gonna make up Snapple, why not make them interesting? Life was first found on Mars in 1976. Lost in space. On the 11th of December 1998, NASA launched the Mars Climate Orbiter. Is this the one they with the measurements, I think I know this one. Into space in a bold mission to study the Martian climate and atmosphere. However, on September the 23rd, 1999, all communication with the $193 million craft was lost forever as it entered orbital insertion. The craft approached Mars on a trajectory that brought it far too close to the planet, meaning that it was likely to have either burned up in the planet's atmosphere or was sent drifting back off into space for a little private adventure of its own. A really expensive private adventure which it didn't enjoy because it's a machine. Now, I would never dream of being too harsh on NASA. Designing and constructing robotic space probes to explore the final frontier on behalf of mankind is bound to involve a bit of trial and error. Let's just try and do the trial and error on the grounds though, shall we, NASA? We've come to expect the fact that sometimes these things will either get lost or blow up with many people on board. I added that many people on board because it's just depressing. Like, being an astronaut can be really dangerous. But the most frustrating thing about the failure of the Mars Climate Orbiter is that it was all down to the simplest and quite silliest of human mistakes. It is the measurement thing. The craft could have detected mankind's very first evidence of alien life. Yeah, it could have, but it's like I could also detect mankind's first evidence of alien life. It's incredibly unlikely, but I could. And it could have uncovered a bunch of bright green hissing war-like reptiles living beneath the surface of Mars. But we'll never know, because nobody bothered to check that all the engineers were using the same measuring system. Danny must really believe on the life in Mars thing. The Mars Climate Orbiter was designed and built by Lockheed Martin Astronautics in Denver, Colorado, who were working on the project in conjunction with a separate NASA navigation team in California. But whereas the NASA team were using metric measurements for the navigation data, Lockheed Martin had decided to go with the Old English version of inches, feet, and yards. This resulted in the ground-based software providing output to the craft in entirely the wrong units of measurement, hurtling the probe at great speed towards the surface of Mars and ultimately right off of NASA's radar. How did they get so long in the journey before realizing this? Lockheed Martin appear to have a lot to answer for here, as they should never have been using the Old English measurements as on a project for NASA, who had stipulated the use of metric measurements for many years. But in fact, NASA has taken full responsibility for the $193 million loss and admitted that the discrepancy in the measurements should have been picked up at their end. Wow, NASA! Talk about owning it. Also, I mean, there could be a difference here, like Lockheed has shareholders and they're like, so we really screwed up badly, guys. It's a $193 million mistake.
Blame it on NASA!
We can't take that hit, and NASA are like, well, it's not our money, is it? I'm sure it's not as simple as that, but I feel like you could have at least split the bill. In fact, it's been since revealed that 2 navigators at NASA did try and raise the alarm on the incompatible measurements, but their concerns were ignored because they hadn't filled out the proper form to voice their concerns. Okay, NASA, that does sound like it's a little bit on you. The Mars Climate Orbiter is still currently lost in space, thanks largely to NASA's rules and regulations, getting a little lost in translation. The worst ever call on the telephone. Meanwhile, over 100 years earlier, back down on planet Earth, the president of Western Union received an important call that was to change his company's destiny. It wasn't a telephone call, largely because the telephone wasn't commercially available yet. The year was 1876. This is one of my biggest screw-ups in videos. Like, you'll read it, it'll be like 1876, and I'll say like 1976 or 1867. I think I have like numberlexia, or I'm sure that's a thing, like numerexia. The eating disease where you avoid foods with numbers. Ba-da-bum-bum. Yes, I just did that on my own joke. Funnily enough, it was exactly the reason why Alexander Graham Bell had been chosen to visit the office of Western Union in person on that day. Western Union was the world's first ever communications company and was dominating the American telegraph industry at the time. I used to just sometimes throw the scripts away, but then I wanted to have them in order in the big stack. So I stopped doing that, because I had to pick them up off the floor afterwards and it was annoying. As we discussed in a previous Business Blaze video on the dispelling of invention myths, Alexander Graham Bell is the man who usually gets the credit with inventing the telephone, although it's more accurate to say that he was the man who first secured the patent for the telephone. I feel this is something that everyone knows. On that day in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell offered to sell this newly acquired patent to Western Union for $100,000. That would be approaching $2.5 million in today's money, so we're not messing around. Regrettably, the president of Western Union, William Orton, was a notoriously arrogant man, and rudely dismissed this newfangled telephonic device as nothing more than a mere toy. A leaked internal memo from Western Union at the time went even further. It read, "The idea is idiotic on the face of it. Furthermore, why would any person want to use this ungainly and impractical device when he can send a messenger to the telegraph office and have a clear written message sent to any large city in the United States?" I don't know, Will, because it sounds like a massive hassle. However, we have kind of come back to it, right? I mean, making a telephone call is like really down my list of preferred means of communication. It will be like, no communication is of course always number one. Number two would be like WhatsApp message, text message, Skype message, Skype call, telephone call, talking to someone in person. Maybe they had a point. Telephones were massive, noisy things back in the 19th century, and the idea of having such a beast in your home would have seemed ludicrous. In fact, over 145 years later, landline telephones are still pretty noisy. The whole concept of having a device in your home that repeatedly makes loud noises at you until you respond is just downright rude, really. I haven't had a landline telephone in a really long time. It's got to have been a decade since I've had a house where there has been a landline telephone. I had one when I was a student, but we didn't even plug it in because you needed it to get the internet, and there was just a cable that sat there, and we never used it. Is that unusual? Like, let me know in the comments below. Do you have a landline telephone? If so, why? Also in the UK, I'm pretty sure we still don't now. We didn't when I was growing up. There's no caller ID. So it just rings, it shows you a number, and you just have it like, hello? And it's like, hi, do you want to get double glazing for your house? Yeah. No. And it doesn't flash up, it's just a random number. It's like having a visitor come around to your house, but instead of giving them just one polite knock on the door, they bang on it repeatedly with their fist until you let them in. I'm amazed that telephones ever caught on. However, it turns out they did. What? Alexander Graham Bell may initially have been disappointed with the results of that meeting, but he must have felt relieved when just a couple of years later he realized that the patent was worth $25 million. Today, $644 million. He did all right. William Morton's bad decision led to the forming of the Bell Telegraph Company under the leadership of Bell's father-in-law, which went on to own the telephone system in America, and the broken up divisions of that original company still pretty much collectively run the US telecom industry today. That's incredible. Willie boy, you made a mistake. Meanwhile, William Morton was quick to realize his mistake and hired the services of Thomas Edison to make incremental improvements on the telephone so Western Union could sell their own patented version. Oh, Willie boy, that's a bit of a dick move, isn't it? But it didn't end well, and following a legal battle with the Bell Telephone Company, Western Union agreed to pull out of the telephone market altogether. Good. The company finally discontinued their telegram service in 2006? What? After realizing that nobody had been sending telegrams the best part of 50 years. I think it used to be on your 100th birthday in the UK, the Queen would send you a telegram. I guess she just has to send you a card now, like a normal person. Or, if you're not an idiot, an email. Oh my god, this is so long. Going back into space, but this time a long time ago in a galaxy far away. Oh god, we're talking about Star Wars. There is nothing that bores me more. Except for baseball and Lord of the Rings. Oh my god. Smash that dislike button. The executives of 20th Century Fox must have been giving themselves a pat on the back following a productive meeting with hot property director George Lucas back in 1976. A few years earlier, Lucas had directed his first big hit, American Graffiti. Never seen it, never will. Which actually turned out to be one of the most profitable films of all time. From a shoestring budget of just $775,000, the film had grown into a surprise monster hit, earning around $200 million and picking up several Academy nominations along the way. Lucas himself had only picked up a $150,000 director's fee for American Graffiti, but the success of the film meant that he was in line for a $500,000 raise when he was pitching his idea for a Western in space to Fox. Not being a huge Star Wars fan myself. Really, Danny? We should form a club. Club of Legends. Raid Shadow Legends. Has that video come out yet where I just rip into Raid Shadow Legends for like 8 minutes straight? I hope so. I essentially think it's a poor man's Fraggle Rock. Never heard of that. I often thought it strange how George Lucas managed to become the richest director of all time despite only directing 6 films. His good buddy Steven Spielberg must feel slightly aggrieved that he's directed about 30 more films than Lucas, but he's only worth about half as much. 30 better films. 36 better films. Also, I think isn't that because George Lucas owns Lucasfilm, and did he sell it to Disney for a huge amount of money? Something like that's interesting. His business is way more interesting than his movies. And I don't know if I imagine Steven Spielberg must own a production company, but Lucasfilm is worth a lot. And it also has all that merch and shit, right? It's all about the merch. I have no merch. Oh, I do have merch. It's in my merch box. Look at this. Buy a t-shirt with my face on it. It's too cold to wear these today. Let's crack on. It all came down to an unusual proposal that Lucas made to 20th Century Fox during that meeting. Lucas revealed that he would be more than happy to forego his $500,000 raise in return for merchandising rights and licensing rights to his silly new sci-fi movie. Smart move, Mr. Lucas. At the time, this sounded too good to be true for Fox. While they were keen to work with Lucas, they didn't hold out much hope for this Star Wars idea, and they weren't very interested in toys. Science fiction films had gone out of date years ago. Star Wars is a fantasy movie. It really is. I love science fiction. Star Wars it's not science fiction. And I know people smash that dislike, whatever. They'd previously lost a small fortune around the merchandising program behind the epic flop Dr. Dolittle. Pretty sure that's not a sci-fi movie. Oh wait, they lost their money on the merchandising with Dolittle. Anyway, so Dr. Dolittle in space! So when Lucas talked himself out of his $500,000 raise, they felt as if they'd sensibly saved a bucket load of cash in return for very little. Naturally, Fox must have been very happy when Star Wars ended up pulling in $775 million at the box office. But they may have been banging their heads against the wall when they realized that Lucas had just pulled in $12 billion from flogging silly plastic toys of robots and giant hairy bears, and a further $4 billion. I did sell it to Disney. When he sold Lucasfilm to Disney. When he sold the Star Wars franchise to Disney in 2012. $4 billion. Oh my god. That's like stupid selling your startup money. Fair play to Lucas. I still prefer Fraggle Rock though. I still have no idea what Fraggle Rock is. Finally, expensive coffee beans. Finally, spare a thought for young British IT worker James Howell, who was the man behind one of the most expensive coffee spillages in history. Howell was one of the first 6 people in the world to run and mine the new cryptocurrency Bitcoin in 2008. In fact, he mined 7,500 Bitcoins, although back in those early days, they were practically worthless. I know Bitcoins are worth a lot because a friend of mine bought a ton of them when they were pretty cheap, and now he's rich. Fast forward a few years, and the value of those coins had surged to $175 million dollars. Not pounds. Don't get excited, but it's still a lot of money. The problem was that not long after his initial cryptocurrency mining expeditions, clumsy Hal had spilt a drink of coffee all over the laptop containing the 7,500 coins and completely ruined it. Oh no! Would that really ruin a hard disk? You could take the hard disk out, right? And he's an IT worker. Come on, Hal. The good news is that sensible Hal dismantled the laptop and kept the hard drive safe. Should read these things ahead. Just in case those bitcoins ever rose in value in the future. The bad news is that years later, absent-minded Hal had a bit of an office spring clean and threw the hard drive away in the trash. Hal has since been petitioning the local council to give him permission to go and rummage in the massive landfill site, which is now believed to contain the lost hard drive. But the council have refused, claiming that undertaking such a search would have a huge environmental impact on the surrounding area. God though, that's a lot of money. To be fair, he'd be wasting his time anyway. The tiny hard drive would be buried somewhere about 5 feet under 6 years worth of waste on a site the size of a football field. Sometimes you just have to know when to give up. I don't know, I'd be pretty tempted to just pay like 10,000 people. Just let's go through it, or just say, there's a hard disk in there somewhere, whoever finds it, I'll give you half. It's gonna get found pretty fast. Despite this minor setback, Hal is still very much a keen Bitcoin enthusiast, and these days is offering to sell his tragic story to any media platform that will listen for the price of £250. It's not a lot, I mean, comparatively. Also, didn't we just tell his story? Look, I don't need to interview Hal. Incredibly, he only accepts payments in Bitcoin. Bonus bogus facts from the inside of Snapple bottle caps. Oh yeah, I totally forgot about this. Let's do it. The average human will eat an average of 8 spiders a year while asleep. I'm sure I was told this once in school, although I'm also convinced that the teacher told us we eat an average of 8 spiders at night while asleep. It's no wonder that I had so many nightmares as a kid. It'd be a bit weird if we were eating them in the day while asleep. Yeah, we'd just be really lazy. It's actually a complete myth, and there's not much in the way of eyewitness evidence. A human would typically wake up from the sensation of a spider crawling inside their mouth, and spiders tend to keep well away from snoring humans anyway. Second fact, fake fact. Dueling is legal in Paraguay as long as both parties are registered blood donors. Alas, no. Dueling in Paraguay is illegal regardless of whether you're donating blood or not. Third, owls are one of the only birds that can see the color blue. In fact, lots of birds have excellent color vision. Some of them can even see into the UV spectrum. Isn't it right that one, like a robin's eye, can see like not X-rays, like infrared? Or no, electromagnetic fields. Robins are crazy. However, it's worth remembering that nobody can see blue as well as Mark Zuckerberg. He can see all of blue. He can see inside you. If you got that joke, you're an OG original legend. Thank you. Holland is the only country with a national dog. Hopelessly wrong on both counts. Countries such as Mexico have national dogs. The Mexican dog is the Xoloitzcuintli. All right. Sometimes more simply referred to as the Mexican hairless dog. But it's irrelevant anyway, as Holland isn't even a country. That's exactly right. This has been Business Blaze. Thank you very much for watching. It's appreciated. If you watched all the way to the end, let me know that you're a complete legend in the comments below, because that's all that matters. You can smash that dislike button as long as you want, but if you watch to the end, well, that's what gets me that sweet YouTube algorithmic love. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time. In fact, I'm about to record one in about 4 minutes. So, but you won't see it for a few days. I'm off. Smash that dislike button.